What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Alright, so we're going to continue our coverage over the X-Men. But first, we have to jump over to Excalibur. And here's the reason why, because we're trying to work our way up to the Phalanx Covenant crossover. But before we're able to properly dive into that crossover, we have to cover some storylines that lead into the crossover. So, some preludes. We already covered one prelude over in Uncanny X-Men, but now we have to cover another prelude that takes place over in Excalibur comics. Now, this storyline is also building up the whole idea of what happened in that first prelude when it came to a character known as Douglock. Now, I will talk more about Douglock as we go through today's video, but also come to find out the legacy virus is becoming a bigger problem for the mutant race, but possibly for the human race as well. And you'll see what I mean as we go through today's storyline. And so as we get into today's storyline, we do pick up with a character known as Zero. Now for Zero, he's from the far future. You see, he was created by an organization known as the Ascani. Now for the Ascani, we don't know much about them because there's going to be storylines down the road we're going to cover that will give us a better idea of who the Ascani truly were. But for right now, we know two things. They have huge connections to Cable, but also, well, they created Zero. Now, when it comes to Zero, he was damaged, but he was found by Strife. You see, Strife took Zero and basically used him as a way for his own bidding. But by this point in Marvel's timeline, Strife is gone. And so for Zero, he's trying his best to become a good person once again, a good android. But here comes big problem right now. You see, he is currently being hunted down by other robots that were created by Strife. Because Strife said, if something happens to me, I want to make sure that everything I created gets destroyed in this timeline. And that includes Zero as well. And so for the last storyline we covered, for Zero, he has been getting hunted down by those other robots. But then in our last video, he found somebody who could possibly help him. That'll be a character known as Douglock. Now, we met Douglock in our last prelude video leading into the Phalanx Covenant. Now, when it comes to Douglock, he is a Phalanx, but real quickly, let me explain his actual origin story. So, we learned in our last prelude video that for the Phalanx, they're all being controlled by a character known as Stephen Lang. Now, for Stephen Lang, his goal right now is to build up an army of Phalanx to use against the X-Men, or the mutant race. Now, these beings are now techno-organic beings, but for Stephen Lang, the way to build up his army, he has to grab people off the road and turn them into Phalanx. Now, for Stephen Lang, he also tried to turn a mutant into a Phalanx, and that will be Doug Ramsey. But here comes the big catch. You see, for Doug Ramsey, he died back in Fall of the Mutants. And so for Stephen Lang, what he did was he took the dead cells of Doug Ramsey and also the dead cells of Warlock, combined the two to create a new Doug Ramsey Phalanx. Now, here's the big catch though. The dead cells still contain mutant genetics. And so with those mutant genes, he was not really able to control Doug Ramsey like he thought he could. And so when it came to our last video for Excalibur, we saw Douglock here being able to break away from the hive mind. Now, luckily for him, he had some help, and that would be Zero. You see, for Zero, he was able to detect that the Doug Ramsey, or Douglock here, was trapped in the hive mind of the Phalanx. And so, thankfully for Zero, he was able to find a way to help Douglock break out of that hive mind. Now, here's the catch. This entire storyline is really more about the idea of Zero and Douglock trying to figure out if two androids can be actual humans, meaning that can they feel like humans do? Sad, happy, angry, glad, all those different kinds of emotions. Now, for Douglock, he believes it's not possible, but for Zero, he believes it is possible. So this three-part story arc is really more about that right there, but also building our way into the Phalanx Covenant storyline. But now we have to jump over to Excalibur. Now, when we do, we pick up with Brian Braddock first. Now, for Brian Braddock in the mid 1990s, he wasn't calling himself Captain Britain. Instead, he was calling himself, well, Britannic. And the reason why, because, well, he was lost in time for a good period of time. And so you had Rachel Summers, the Phoenix, give up her life as a way to bring him back into the main Marvel timeline. Now, once that was done, you had the team realize there's something wrong with Brian because Brian now has the ability, apparently, to see things that other folks cannot see. You see, he sees things that could drive other people mad because now he's able to tap into the natural world. Now, we have no idea what that means yet, but apparently it's a big thing. But apparently he realized he was being called to deal with a certain problem across the world. And so you have Brian leave, but you have Megan and Kitty Pryde follow him to see where in the world they are going to. But we also have to focus on Kitty Pryde, and here's the reason why. You see, for Kitty Pryde, we're going to get a new storyline be built up for her character, dealing with her father. You see, in our last video, her father called her, but she had missed the call. Now, for Kitty Pryde, when she had first joined the X-Men, when she was like 14 years old, her parents got a divorce, and that did a number to her. And so with that being said, when her father called and she had missed the call, she was kind of wondering why in the world her father called her. And so she called her mother. Now, like I said, they got a divorce. And so you had Kitty Pryde's mom tell her like, hey, listen, I have not talked to your father in months, so I have no idea why in the world he called you. Now, for Kitty Pryde, she hates the idea that her family is no longer together, and she kind of looked at the X-Men as her family. Matter of fact, in my way early X-Men videos, I had talked about the idea that for Storm Wolverine, they're kind of like Kitty Pryde's parents. She looks at Storm as her mother. She looks at Wolverine as her father. And the rest of the X-Men, they're just different family members. But either way for Kitty, she's kind of wondering what's going on with her father. But now we have to jump over to Muir Island. Now, when we do, we pick up with Moira McTaggart. Now, for Moira McTaggart, her main goal at the moment is to hopefully find a cure for the legacy virus. Because right now, the virus is killing off mutants across the board, left and right. And so her main goal is to hopefully find a cure for the legacy virus. Now, with that being said, she's also being helped out by another character, and that would be Rory Campbell. Now, Rory Campbell has his own storyline we're going to follow in this video, but also other videos down the road. Now, you have Moira McTaggart being confronted by Charles Xavier. Because Charles, this was the best time to come over to Muir Island to help out with the search for the cure of the legacy virus. Now, when it comes to his school, he left Beast in charge so he could be there with more to hopefully find a cure for the legacy virus. And so then we jump over to this family. Now, the family is somewhat random, and honestly, we're not going to see them again in later videos. But for Courtney, she's the daughter of the family, and she runs off into the forest that is nearby Zero and Douglock's cave. And so once she does run into the forest, she runs into Zero. Now, for Zero, he's trying to process the whole idea of why is a child so important? Like, what makes a child so special? And so part of him or his circuits makes him believe that he fully understands why a child is so special. And then he puts the child down to let her go back to her family, and he goes back to meet up with Douglock. But once you have Zero meet back up with Douglock, you have Douglock wondering why Zero did not just go ahead and kill off the girl. Because to Douglock, he's kind of like, that girl now has the ability to tell other people that could possibly get us in trouble. But for Zero, he says that's not the way of life. And the problem is, what you think way of life is completely wrong. Now, while you have the two characters talking, you also have Zero say, listen, there was another reason why I had freed you from the Phalanx Covenant. Because yes, I did need your help, but I realized you have the ability to be completely different from the other Phalanx. You have the ability to become sentient. And so you have Zero show Douglock, like, dude, you came from the dead cells of Doug Ramsey. And so you have what he remembers right up till he had died. You have the ability to understand what it's like to be a human. But while you have the two characters talking, the robots of Strife, they begin to attack that family from earlier. And the reason why, because the young girl Courtney had talked to Zero. And so because of that, they're all like, hey, they gotta go. And so you have Douglock and Zero step in, but you also have Excalibur step in as well to help protect the family. Now, guys, Nightcrawler is not there for a good reason. I'll explain why here in a few chapters down the road. But for right now, you have Excalibur, Douglock, and Zero working together to fight against the robots. But then you have Kitty Pryde run into Douglock. And this is huge. And the reason why, because for Kitty Pryde, she was very close to Doug Ramsey. They were kind of like best friends. And so to see Doug Ramsey be here again as a Phalanx, it's just throwing her off. But she knows that this is not the real Doug Ramsey. But while you have the two characters just standing there, you did have Zero realize, hey, we gotta go. This area is no longer safe. And so you have Zero use his ability to teleport him, Douglock, Excalibur, and that family as well out of that situation. So as we dive into the second chapter, we kind of find out that Zero had teleported everybody over to the base that belongs to Strife. Now, when our heroes arrive, they also realize that there's some more robots that belong to Strife inside the base, but luckily they are currently deactivated. So right now our heroes should not be attacked. But for our heroes like Captain Britain, he's kind of wondering why in the world that he believes that his mission is Zero. Now for Zero, he has no idea why he is the mission, but he does know one thing, that right now he's trying to change. Now for Captain Britain or Britannic, he wants answers in this exact moment. And so he does get a tad bit aggressive, but you have Douglock step in. Now for Excalibur, this is the first time they're hearing about the Phalanx. But while everybody talking to one another, you have Megan realize where the base of Strife is actually located at. It's right underneath the Pentagon. And matter of fact, we have to jump over to the Pentagon. And the reason why, because we pick up with Forge. Now, by this point in Marvel's timeline, Forge was the liaison for the X Factor team. But he's right now talking to their last liaison, which was Val Cooper. Now, we kind of find out that Val Cooper just gave Forge a file on Kitty Pryde's father. And we're kind of left to wonder what is so special about that file and her father. But I want to jump back over to Charles Xavier and also Moira McTaggart, because you have these two characters currently trying to find a cure for the legacy virus. The problem is right now, unfortunately, they can't find it, but they're trying their best. But while they're trying to find the cure, they're also kind of being able to rebuild their bond with one another, because these two characters, they used to date. Now, unfortunately, they had a falling out, but they used to be somewhat in love with one another. And so while you have the two working together, it's kind of like, oh, hold up now. Could we see Charles Xavier and Moira McTaggart possibly getting back together? That'll be pretty huge. Now, for Moira McTaggart, while you have the two characters working on the cure, you have Moira say, hey, listen, Charles, I have one last surprise for you. But unfortunately, you have not been able to figure out what that surprise could possibly be. Now, for a brief moment, I kind of want to jump back over to Stephen Lang. Now, we have talked about him before, but honestly, the only reason why I want to sit down and talk about him for this video is because for Stephen Lang being in charge of the entire Phalanx Covenant, as it seems, he's very upset about the idea that he lost Douglock. He's realizing he lost Douglock just now, and he's kind of wondering why in the world he had lost that one particular Phalanx. But getting back over to the base of Strife, I want to focus now on Douglock and also Kitty Pryde. Here's the reason why. Because for Kitty Pryde, she's the idea of what she's seeing right now, which is a clone of her dead friend Doug Ramsey, who's right now Douglock. Now to her, she believes it's just a robot who's pretending to be her friend. But in reality, it's him saying, yeah, I am a clone, but technically I'm not pretending to be your friend. I'm not a robot. I'm actually alive. I'm a techno-organic being. I was grown out of the dead cells of your dead friend. And so you also have Douglock called her narrow-minded. And so with him saying all those different things at once, it really does tick her off a lot, to the point where she does use her ability on him, her phasing ability, which of course makes him go a tad bit crazy because she has the ability to mess up electronics, which is, well, him. But now we shift our focus over to Britannic, who's very upset about the idea of, well, Zero being his mission, but not knowing why Zero is his mission. And so while you have the two characters talking, you didn't have Megan realize that she can understand the frustration and the confusion that Zero is going through. And so once he hears that, for Zero, he realized what is going on. What could be the possible mission for Britannic? Because he says, listen, I just realized something. If Megan is able to feel how I feel currently right now at this exact moment, that means I may become sentient. I have feelings. But also that means I am now able to access files that were somewhat locked away by Strife. Now, right after he says that, the droids that were into the base of Strife, they become active. And now their main target is, of course, Zero and other people who have connections to Zero. So like Excalibur and that family. But before you have the robots try to attack our heroes, you have Zero say, oh my God, now I know why Strife wants me gone so badly, because I hold the key to the cure of the legacy virus. But as we get into the ending of the second chapter, you now have Charles Xavier and Moira McTaggart looking at a different sample of the legacy virus affecting somebody's cells. Now, we're still believing that the virus is only attacking the mutant race, and that's really it. But you have Moira McTaggart say, no, it had evolved. It's now going to attack the human race as well. And so for Charles and Moira McTaggart, this problem just got a whole lot bigger. And so as we dive into the final chapter for today's video, we do pick up with Kitty Pryde trying to do surgery on Zero. And here's the reason why. Those robots that had activated earlier, they're going to blow up the entire base. And here comes the big catch. You see, for Kitty Pryde and the rest of the team, they realize that the detonator's inside Zero's body. And so you have Kitty Pryde trying to use her phasing ability to pull it out. Now, while she's able to do that, you didn't have Brian Braddock get very angry at Zero because this man is holding the cure to the legacy virus. But here comes the big problem. It's a file that contains information about the legacy virus, but right now for Zero, he is unable to access that file, which means there's a huge possibility that we may not get the cure for the virus from Zero. But now we have to jump over to Nightcrawler. Now, when we do, we kind of find out that for Nightcrawler, he's coming back over to Muir Island. And the reason why, because in our last video, him and Amanda went over to Germany to fight against a character known as Despair to save their mother. And so with them being able to come back, you have Nightcrawler realize there's something wrong with Charles Xavier. Now, for Charles Xavier, it's really more of the idea that this is a man who's now losing faith in his goals to find a cure for the legacy virus, to be able to achieve peace between the mutants in the human race. It's Charles kind of want to go ahead and give up. But then he realized that Nightcrawler still believes in the possibility that they'll be able to find a cure for the virus, that they'll be able to keep pushing on and reach the goals where humans and mutants can live together in harmony. But for Charles, he's kind of like, how in the world are you able to keep that faith inside of you so much? And it's Nightcrawler saying, because of you. Like, you challenged me to keep pushing forward. You taught me to face all these different kinds of challenges with the best I can do, and hopefully we can still achieve greatness. It's all because of you, Charles. And honestly, I will still have that faith no matter what. And so with that, you have Charles kind of regain some faith that he had lost. But also, he's being motivated because he wants to help out Moira McTaggart. This woman had worked so hard on trying to find the virus, it does seem like she's very weak and tired, but there is another reason why. But getting back over to Excalibur and also Zero, you have Captain Britain or Britannic trying to find a way out of the base, while you have Shadowcat and also Zero trying their best to collect any data that Strife had left behind in the base. Now, while trying to do that, there's this huge feedback that hits Zero right in the face. And of course, it does damage him. Now, the explosion is also stopped by Megan before the explosion could hit the family that unfortunately had been tagged along with Excalibur. But this begins the process of saying like how Megan is able to control the environment around her, possibly reality warping abilities. Now, for Zero, after that explosion, he kind of realized that he's just an android because now his face has been severely injured. Now, for a brief moment, I want to jump back over to Warwick Campbell. Here's the reason why. Because for Warwick Campbell, this man had learned that in the far, far future, he might become a character known as Ahab. Now, Ahab is a mutant hunter from the Days of Future Past timeline that we thought originally was going to be the future for the main Marvel timeline. But that became an alternate timeline. But for Warwick Campbell, he saw the future where it's still a possibility that he might become that character. And he has no idea why he would turn so evil. And so you have Amanda say, listen, I was there as well when you saw your possible future. And that's the thing. It is a possible future. It does not mean you will actually become that character. There's a huge possibility that you may not become that character at all. And so for Worry, it's him hoping in the possibility that he stays a good guy. But getting back over to our heroes, you have our heroes right now trying to escape the base of Strife. And the reason why, because the entire base is about to get blown up. Now for Zero, he stays behind. And the reason why, because he needs to control the blast radius. And so while he's trying to stay behind to handle that situation, you have everybody else get out of there. Now for Zero, he finds a message that was left behind by Strife. With this message, it's Strife saying, hey man, listen, I planned all of this. I was really hoping that one day you'll become self-aware. You'll become sentient. But when you do become sentient, unfortunately, you'll be killed off just like this. And of course, you will die with the legacy virus. But here comes the big catch. You see, for Strife, I don't think he knew about the Phalanx. And the reason why, because you have Douglock go back in the base to hopefully save Zero. But you have Zero say, you can't save me. But what you can do is download the information of the legacy virus and use that information as a way to hopefully find a cure for the virus and save the day. And Douglock leaves. And of course, the base blows up and Zero supposedly dies. But as we jump back over to Moira Taggart and Charles Xavier, you have Moira tell Charles like, hey, listen, when it came to our last sample that came from a human, it came from me. It's Moira Taggart telling Charles Xavier that she has now received the legacy virus. And with that being said, this is where we're going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see you on the next comic book video.